Rain beat against their bruised faces as 17-year-old Silas pulled his younger sister away from the only home they had. Blood stained his torn jacket, a cruel final gift from their stepfather. Tonight, finding a hidden cave deep inside Oregon's dangerous logging forest was not just an adventure. It was the only way to survive. The heavy oak door of the trailer slammed shut with force that rattled Silas's teeth. The deadbolt slid into place, sounding like a gunshot over the screaming October wind. Standing on the cracked concrete steps, 17-year-old Silas tightened his grip on the small hand of his 12-year-old sister, Lily. Inside, the muffled, furious shouts of their stepfather, Gregory, still crashed against the thin walls, followed by the familiar, terrifying sound of a Jim Beam bottle smashing on the floor. Gregory had finally carried out his threats. With their mother gone for more than a year, the weak thread holding the home together had fully broken. "Silas, it's freezing," Lily whispered, her teeth chattering hard. She wore only a thin cotton sweater and denim jeans, completely unready for the sharp cold of the Pacific Northwest fall. Silas quickly pulled a battered blue North Face backpack onto his shoulders. He had seen this night coming for weeks and had secretly gotten ready. Inside the bag were 2 fleece blankets, 4 cans of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, a stolen box of waterproof matches, a heavy-duty tarp, and a cheap plastic flashlight. It was not enough to survive a winter, but it was enough to survive one night. "I know, Bug. I know. We can't stay here," Silas said, keeping his voice calm even though terror squeezed his chest. He looked down the dark, muddy driveway leading toward Highway 224. He knew that if he called the police, the Clackamas County Sheriff's deputies would come, take one look at everything, and send them straight into the crowded foster care system. He had heard the horror stories. He knew they would be split up. Silas would age out in a year, and Lily would disappear into the system forever. He had promised their mother on her deathbed that he would never let Lily leave his sight. "We're going to the trees," Silas said, pointing toward the huge black wall of the Mount Hood National Forest that touched the edge of Gregory's wild, overgrown property. "If you want to know more, like this video now so it reaches more people." They moved fast, slipping on the wet, rotting pine needles that covered the forest floor. The deeper they walked, the darker it got, the thick roof of ancient Douglas firs blocking even the weak moonlight. Silas used a cheap flashlight only when he had to, scared that Gregory might have grabbed his hunting rifle and come after them. For 3 painful hours, the brother and sister pushed through thick blackberry bushes that tore at their jeans and skin. The temperature kept falling fast. Silas knew hypothermia was a real danger. His hands were already going numb, and Lily kept stumbling, completely out of strength. They needed shelter, and a simple tarp tied between trees would not save them from a freezing night ahead. As they crossed a steep, rocky ravine to stay away from a rushing creek, Silas's boot hit something hard and metal. He fell forward, scraping his palms on sharp shale. When he shined the flashlight down, he saw a rusted sheet of corrugated iron half buried in the mud. Curious and desperate, Silas grabbed the metal and pulled. It did not move. He dropped to his knees and dug wildly through the wet dirt and thick moss. Lily knelt beside him and copied what he did, without a word. Beneath the iron and a tangled mess of dead ivy was a set of heavy, rotting wooden boards bolted into the solid rock wall of the ravine. Faded, peeling white paint on the center board barely showed the words. "Property of D. Hammond. Danger. Keep out." Silas felt a rush of adrenaline. No one had touched these boards in years. The wood was almost turning into dirt. He picked up a sharp, heavy rock from the creek bed and smashed it against a rusted padlock that held a thick chain across the boards. The old metal screamed and finally broke on the third hard hit. With a groan of shifting dirt, Silas pulled the heavy wooden barrier backward. A rush of dry, stale air hit his face. It smelled faintly of sulfur, old dust, and dry earth, so different from the freezing wet rot of the forest. Silas shined the flashlight into the open black hole. The beam cut into the darkness, showing a smooth natural stone tunnel that opened into a huge cave. "Come on," Silas whispered, his voice shaking with both wonder and relief. "We're going in." The heavy silence of the cave instantly swallowed the loud storm outside as Silas pulled the rotting wooden barrier back into place to block the wind. The temperature changed at once. The cave was amazingly protected, holding a cool but totally dry warmth. Silas swept the flashlight around their new shelter. The cave was about 20 feet wide and stretched farther than the light could reach. It looked like an old miner's claim, or maybe a bootlegger's hideout from Prohibition. In the far corner, a broken wooden platform sat rotting away, and under lay scattered rusted tools. A crushed Coleman lantern, a heavy iron pickaxe with cracked handle, and several steel cans so rusted they looked older than Silas himself. More important, the floor was made of soft, dry dirt and loose shale. It was a perfect hiding place. "Sit on the tarp," Silas said as he quickly unpacked the backpack. He wrapped Lily tightly in both fleece blankets and watched her shake hard. He knew they needed heat, but building a fire inside a closed cave could kill them with carbon monoxide. Then, while checking the back of the cave, he felt a light, clear draft brush his cheek. He looked up. About 15 feet above them, a narrow, sharp crack in the ceiling worked like a natural chimney, pulling air up and out to the surface. Using the rusty pickaxe blade, Silas dug a small, deep pit right under crack. Then he dug a second slanted hole connecting to the bottom of the first one, making a simple Dakota fire hole. He had read about it once in an old Boy Scout manual he had found at the Estacada Public Library. The design would feed air to the fire, making it burn very hot with almost no smoke. Silas gathered dry twigs and brittle roots that had pushed through the cave ceiling over the years. Striking a waterproof match, he carefully built a small flame. In only a few minutes, a steady, nearly smokeless heat began rising from the ground. Lily moved closer, her pale face glowing in the soft orange light. For the first time all night, she stopped shaking. "Are we going to live here, see?" she asked quietly, staring into the fire. Just for a little while, Silas lied smoothly, even though deep down he knew they had nowhere else to go. "Until I can figure out a plan. Write helpful in the comments if you watched attentively." The next 3 days were a hard test of strength and smarts. Silas went outside only at dawn and dusk. Using the broken board from the old platform and the heavy iron pickaxe, he started strengthening the entrance. He pushed thick branches against the rotten boards and carefully covered the outside with heavy moss, ferns, and dead pine needles, hiding the cave opening perfectly in the ravine. They got water from a nearby creek and boiled it in one of the empty soup cans over their smokeless fire. Food, though, was almost gone. They were down to half a can of soup. On the afternoon of the fourth day, the weak piece of their hidden shelter shattered. Silas was outside washing their empty cans in the creek when the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle rang through the valley. It was close. Too close. Silas dropped the cans and pressed himself flat against the muddy bank, his heart hammering against his ribs. He held his breath and listened. Heavy boots crushed dead leaves nearby. From where he hid beneath a fallen cedar tree, Silas watched a large man step into the clearing. It was not Gregory. The man wore a heavy camouflage jacket, chewed on a matchstick, and carried a smoking Remington hunting rifle. Silas knew him from town. Travis, a feared local poacher known for illegal traps and a violent temper. Travis stopped and looked around the creek. Then he moved closer to the water, right beside the patch of mud where Silas had been kneeling just seconds earlier. Silas watched in frozen fear as Travis looked down. There, clearly pressed into the soft clay, was a fresh footprint of Silas's size 10 sneaker. Travis knelt and traced the edge of the print with a thick, rough finger. Then he slowly stood, his eyes narrowing as he studied the thick brush around the ravine. He was not hunting deer anymore. He was hunting a person. Silas knew that if Travis found the cave, he would steal their few supplies, or worse, drag them back to town for a reward. Backing away silently, inch by painful inch, Silas crawled through the mud, knowing their survival now depended not only on beating the weather, but on outsmarting a dangerous hunter in their own woods. Silas slid to the freezing mud, his chest flat against the earth, copying the stillness of wild animals he had seen in documentaries. Every snapping twig sounded like thunder in the tense forest. He reached the hidden entrance of the cave and slipped behind the rotting boards just as Travis's heavy boots came to the edge of the ravine. Inside, Lily sat close to the dying coals of the Dakota fire hole, her eyes wide with questions she did not ask. Silas pressed a muddy finger to his lips and breathed slowly through a narrow crack in the moss-covered barrier. He watched Travis walk just outside. The poacher's flashlight beam sliced through the dim light, sweeping across dead ferns and scraping the rock wall. The beam passed over their hidden door twice. Silas gripped the heavy iron pickaxe, so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was ready to swing if the man tried to pull away the boards. But Travis, angry at the fading light and falling temperature, cursed loudly and spit his matchstick into the mud. He fired one angry shot into branches of a nearby Douglas fir. The booming echo covered the sound of his footsteps as he left. Silas collapsed against the cave wall and slid down into the dirt, shaking from the crash of fear after the danger passed. But the terrifying moment made one thing painfully clear. The front of the cave was not safe. If Travis came back with tracking dogs, or if one strange beam of sunlight hit the entrance just right, they would be found. They needed a backup place. Silas grabbed the cheap plastic flashlight and motioned for Lily to follow him. "We need to see how deep this goes. Stay right behind me." They went past the broken wooden platform, leaving the weak orange glow of the fire behind. The air turned much colder and carried a metal smell. About 50 feet in, the natural stone tunnel bent sharply to the left and revealed a clear man-made choke point. There, the rock had been blasted away, forming a smooth arch that opened into a second chamber, perfectly round. Silas's flashlight showed something that made his heart stop. Stacked neatly against a far wall were 4 huge olive-green military crates covered by a thick, dusty canvas tarp. Beside them sat a rusted but still whole kerosene heater, 2 50-gallon steel drums, and a heavy wooden workbench. Silas rushed forward and yanked the tarp away. Painted on the side of the top crate in faded black letters were the words, D. Hammond, Fallout Cache, 1962. David Hammond had not been a miner. He had been a Cold War survivalist waiting for the end of the world. Using the rusted edge of his pickaxe, Silas pried open the metal clasps on the first crate. Inside were heavy vacuum-sealed Mylar bags. He tore one open and found dense survival biscuits, dried beef, and powdered milk. The second crate held everything they needed to stay alive. 3 clean military sleeping bags made for below-zero temperatures, a hand-crank emergency radio, a full first aid kit with clean bandages and iodine, a heavy woodsman's axe, and 4 gallons of seal kerosene. But the third crate changed everything. Inside, wrapped in thick, oily cloth, lay a Winchester Model 94 lever-action rifle and 2 heavy boxes of .30-30 ammunition. Silas stared at the gun, feeling a cold, hard decision settle over him. He was not going to be a victim anymore. He was not going to run from Gregory. And he was definitely not going to hide from Travis. For the next 3 weeks, Silas and Lily worked nonstop, fueled by Hammond's high-calorie rations. Silas used a woodsman's axe to cut small dead cedar trees deep in the forest, dragging them back at night. He strengthened the cave entrance, building a second inner wall out of logs and sealing the cracks with clay and moss to make a thick, quiet, insulated space. He got the old kerosene heater working and safely sent its fumes out through another crack he found in the prepper chamber. The cave changed from a cold, dark hole in the ground into a fortress. It was dry, warm, and completely invisible from the outside world. Right? Yes, if you want more of this content. But the outside world was not done with them. Late January brought a brutal atmospheric river to the Pacific Northwest. The sky over Mount Hood National Forest turned dark and purple, and the temperature dropped deep into the single digits. Then came a huge blizzard, the worst Clackamas County had seen in 10 years. It dumped 3 feet of heavy wet snow across the timberlands, snapping old branches and burying logging roads under a thick white blanket. Inside their underground shelter, however, 17-year-old Silas and 12-year-old Lily were protected from the deadly cold. The old Cold War cave had turned out to be brilliantly built. Silas had spent the early winter weeks perfecting the airflow. The kerosene heater, taken from David Hammond's 1962 Fallout Cache, burned with a low, steady hum, keeping the inside near a livable 60 degrees. They sat cross-legged on thick military canvas, playing endless games of gin rummy under the soft yellow light of a battery lantern. But the loneliness was starting to wear Silas down. Their sealed Mylar survival food was finally running low. He divided the dried beef and powdered milk carefully, always making sure Lily got more. He spent hours staring at the heavy log barrier he had built, his hands resting on the cold steel of the Winchester Model 94. He knew they could not stay hidden forever. The mountain was a shelter, but it was also a grave waiting to be sealed by snow. 10 miles away, the storm was affecting people in the valley very differently. Inside the dim, smoke-stained Rusty Anchor, a dive bar at the edge of the Estacada Highway, the blizzard had trapped a dozen angry, restless locals. One of them was Travis. The poacher Silas had barely escaped weeks earlier. Travis was on his 5th shot of cheap whiskey, slamming his glass hard onto the sticky mahogany bar. "I'm telling you, the woods are haunted, or somebody is out there messing with my living." Travis slurred to the bartender, Wyatt. "I set 4 steel snares down in the ravine near the old Hammond claim. Gone. Ripped right out of frozen mud. And I keep seeing tracks. Sneaker tracks. Who wears sneakers in the woods in December?" Sitting 3 stools away, slowly drinking a warm draft beer he could barely pay for, was Gregory. Gregory looked awful. His face was unshaved and swollen, and his knuckles were bruised from drunken rages. His whole life had fallen apart since Silas and Lily disappeared. The police had questioned him hard and searched his trailer from top to bottom, even though they could not prove what he had done to the children. The suspicion stayed around him like a bad smell. But even worse for Gregory, the state welfare office had immediately stopped the monthly check he got for Lily's care. Without that money, the bank was taking his property and the local liquor store had cut off his credit. Through his drunken haze, Travis's words hit Gregory like a nail through the brain. Sneaker tracks. The old Hammond claim. Gregory knew exactly where the Hammond property was. It bordered the eastern edge of his own overgrown land. He knew about the steep ravines there. He also knew Silas wore a pair of worn-out size 10 sneakers. A twisted, cruel idea began to harden in Gregory's mind. If the kids were out there hiding in some old cave, he could drag them back. If he returned with Lily, the police would stop investigating him. The state would restart the checks. And he would be in control again. Gregory slid off his bar stool, his heavy boots hitting the floor with a dark thud. He said nothing as he pushed past Travis and threw his battered quarters coat over his shoulders. Wyatt, the bartender, watched Gregory in the mirror. He saw the wild, violent shine in the man's eyes. Knowing Gregory's history and remembering the missing posters on the tavern window, Wyatt quietly reached under the counter for his phone and called the county sheriff's dispatch. Outside, the whiteout was blinding. The wind screamed at 40 miles per hour, whipping the snow into a local hurricane. Gregory climbed into his rusted Ford pickup. The tires spun hard before finally gripping the icy road. It took Gregory 2 hours to fight his way down the highway, and in the end, he had to leave the truck on the shoulder of Highway 224 when the snowbanks got too deep. Armed with a heavy solid steel tire iron, he pulled from behind the driver's seat. He started the miserable walk into the tree line. The freezing wind ripped at his bare face, turning his skin a raw, blotchy red. The alcohol in his blood gave him a false feeling of warmth, feeding a blind rage that pushed him through waist-deep drifts. He stumbled, fell, cursed, but kept going, driven by one desperate need, to take back what he thought was his. It was 2 a.m. on the second night of the blizzard when he finally reached the edge of the Hammond Ravine. Deep underground, Silas woke with a jolt. The cave was almost fully dark, except for the faint orange glow of the kerosene heater. Silas held his breath, his heart beating wildly against his ribs like a trapped bird. The thick stone walls usually blocked most sounds from above, turning the storm into only a far-off whisper. But this sound was different, rhythmic, wrong. Crunch, drag, crunch, drag. Heavy footsteps were pressing down the snow, right above the main entrance. Silas threw off his military sleeping bag, ignoring the freezing cold clinging to the cave walls. He reached out in silence and grabbed the Winchester, his thumb resting on the cold hammer without thinking. "Silas," Lily whispered from the darkness, her voice shaking. "Quiet, bug," Silas whispered back, his eyes fixed on the narrow, reinforced tunnel leading to the surface. "Grab your boots. Go into the back chamber with the crates. Do not come out unless I tell you." Lily did not argue. She scrambled backward into the deeper fallout shelter and pulled the heavy canvas tarp across the archway to hide herself. Silas crept forward into the dark vestibule he had built from cedar logs and packed clay. It worked as a buffer between the hidden outer planks and the inner shelter. He stood perfectly still, his bare feet freezing on the loose dirt floor. Thud! The whole cave seemed to shake. Someone was hitting the outside board hard. Silas! The voice was muffled by the wind and thick wood, but the drunk, ugly sound of it was unmistakable. It was Gregory. "I know you're in there, you ungrateful little rat." Gregory shouted as the tire iron smashed against frozen moss and wood. "Open this up. You hear me? You're costing me everything." Silas felt a wave of sickness, followed instantly by a burst of pure adrenaline. The boy who had once curled up in fear inside, that trailer was gone, buried under weeks of pain, survival, and responsibility. Silas raised the rifle. The barrel pointed straight at the heavy inner log door. Crack! The old rusted padlock, holding the outside planks together, finally broke under the hard blows of the tire iron. The rottenwood groaned and collapsed outward into the snow. A blast of freezing wind screamed into the narrow vestibule, carrying swirls of white snow with it. Gregory stumbled into the dark gap between the ruined outer entrance and Silas's strong inner wall. He looked terrifying, covered in ice, his clothes stiff with frost, his eyes wide and red in the darkness. He gasped for air and leaned against the cold rock, not knowing that only inches of packed logs stood between him and his stepson. "Lily!" Gregory roared, lifting the tire iron above his head to smash the second wall. "Get out here right now." "Stop right there, Gregory." Silas's voice sliced through the wind like a blade. It was shockingly calm, made louder by the stone tunnel. Gregory froze, his tire iron hanging in the air. He pressed his face against a tiny crack in the log wall. "Silas, open this door, boy, before I tear it down and break your jaw." "I'm giving you one warning," Silas said, slipping his finger inside the trigger guard. The hard clack-clack of the lever action, loading a .30-30 round into the chamber, echoed darkly in the tight space. "We are heavily armed. You are trespassing. Turn around and walk back into snow." Gregory let out a cruel, barking laugh. "You don't have the guts, you coward. You never did." He swung the tire iron with all the strength he had left. The metal bit deep into the cedar logs, showering Silas with splinters and frozen clay. Silas did not blink. He shifted his aim exactly 2 feet to the right of the wooden door, pointing at a thick chunk of solid shale and clay sticking out from the cave wall. Then he pulled the trigger. The blast was overwhelming. Firing a powerful hunting rifle inside a rocky cavern made a shockwave that was impossible to describe. The sound hit Gregory like a wall of concrete. The flash lit the narrow vestibule in a blinding, terrifying burst of yellow and white. The heavy bullet slammed into the rock wall inches from the cave opening, shattering the shale. Sharp stone pieces and dust exploded outward, blasting through the cracks in the logs and straight into Gregory's face. Gregory screamed. It was high, panicked, and stripped of all the bravery he had shown a second earlier. Deafened, half blinded by the flash and stone dust, and bleeding from many shallow cuts across his face, he dropped the tire iron. He stumbled backward, his heavy boots catching on the broken remains of the outer door, and crashed into the deep snow outside the ravine. Inside, Silas worked the lever again, throwing a hot brass shell onto the dirt floor with a sharp ping. He kept the rifle up, his ears ringing hard, waiting for Gregory to charge one more time. But the next sound was not Gregory's boots. It was a sharp, repeating cry of a police siren cutting through the blizzard. Share this video with anyone who needs this information. Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller had followed Gregory's wild tire tracks from the highway, leaving their cruiser behind when the snow got too deep and pushing through the forest with strong flashlights. The bright white beam swept down into the ravine, lighting up the terrifying scene. The smashed entrance of a hidden cave, blood on the snow, and Gregory sobbing while clutching his bleeding face. Sheriff's Department. "Stay down," Brody shouted, drawing his service weapon as Miller tackled the confused Gregory, forcing his face into the freezing snow and snapping steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Brody moved carefully toward the dark opening inside the ravine, his flashlight beam cutting through the swirling snow. He smelled the sharp, unmistakable scent of burnt gunpowder. "Silas," Brody called, his voice carrying both command and deep worry. "It's Sheriff Brody. Gregory is in custody. Are you and Lillian there, son?" Inside the vestibule, Silas lowered the Winchester. His hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He put on the safety and leaned the rifle against the wall. Then he slowly unlatched the heavy inner log door and pushed it open. Silas stepped into the blinding glare of the police lights. The howling wind cut straight through his flannel shirt, but he stood tall. Behind him, Lily came out of the shadows, wrapped in a clean military sleeping bag, completely safe. As the wind whipped around them, a huge wave of warm, kerosene-scented air rolled out from the perfectly built shelter and washed over the freezing deputies. Sheriff Brody lowered his weapon, his mouth falling open in disbelief. He had spent weeks fearing the day he would find 2 frozen bodies in those woods. Instead, looking into the depths of the heavily fortified, climate-controlled bunker, he realized he was not looking at victims at all. He was looking at a 17-year-old boy who had gone to war with the mountain, and won. The Hammond Cave did not just protect them from the freezing Oregon winter. It gave them the start of their freedom. After Sheriff Brody recorded their incredible underground shelter, a kind local judge gave Silas early emancipation. Today, Silas and Lily legally own that piece of forest land. The heavy oak door of their old life is shut forever, replaced by a safe place built from dirt, stone, and the unbreakable bond between a brother and sister. If you learned something new, write "I learned" in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Also, write in the comments which country you're watching from so you can receive all our new content.